Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, here today with the 10th episode of the Planar Project. And while I know a lot of you are probably desperate for me to review the Zetian Legend or the Timeless 2, I wanted to do a review on this IEM because honestly it was a pretty nice surprise to listen to. This is the KiwiEars Aether, priced at $170 featuring what they're calling a 15mm planar driver and some pretty gorgeous looking shells, honestly. But does the Ether do enough to stand out in what is becoming a very crowded planar market? And is it worth the extra spend compared to some of the budget kings that we've had come out recently? Let's find out. First, as usual, a disclaimer. This Ether was sent to me by Linsoul for review. I am not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell this if I wanted to, I have gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal tastes at play. Thank you so much to Linsoul for sending this set out, and thank you all so much for your support. As usual, we begin with the unboxing experience, and the Ether does a good job of masking what I feel has become the sort of traditional KiwiEars unboxing experience found on everything from the Kanta all the way up to the Punch. On the Ether, it looks nicer with the silver boxes, but you get the same final results. Those silver boxes inside the big silver box make it seem fancy and feel a bit more premium, but as I said, once you're inside, you get what is essentially the same basic accessories package that you find on every other KiwiEars IEM. You get a cable, you get a slightly differently textured case from the usual KiwiEars case, but the same overall design. Inside mesh, standard layout in here. And you get two sets of ear tips. You get these sort of dark gray ones and these translucent white ones. Similar bore sizes on both of these, honestly. I've never been a huge fan of these tips personally, but they work. For $170, I feel like this level of included accessories is a little bit disappointing. A modular connector and more premium ear tips are common features on IEMs that cost less than this, and I would have really appreciated them here. But as I said before, this is par for the course for KiwiEars. You get this on the KE4, the Kanta, the Arioso, the Orchestra Lite, even the Punch. So I wasn't expecting any more or any less from them, honestly. Moving on, the included cable here is a version of the same 4-wire braid that KiwiEars has been including on several different IEMs. Differences on them have all been sort of the color of the wire and the sheaths here. I have to say the cable here on the Ether is a bit rubbery feeling. It doesn't feel horrible in the hands, but it's not what I would call a good feeling cable either. The 3.5mm connector here is flat black metal with a bit of a contour for easier grip, but there's no branding on it whatsoever, and it looks pretty generic, honestly. The Y-split is more of the same, sort of generic looking metal with contour on it for unknown reasons, and then you get the chin slider, which is the standard circular bead, which at least sits flat against it. The 2-pin connectors are, again, standard, and they match the rest of the hardware. The coloring on the plastic here, the red and the clear, is the only indicator of left and right on these connectors, so keep an eye on this when you're going to be putting these on for the first time. Honestly, I really don't feel like this cable belongs on a $170 IEM. It feels more like it belongs on a $70 IEM, so it could be better. In terms of build, you will have noticed that the Ether shells are a bit on the large side here. They're all resin with metal faceplates and metal nozzles that are inlaid into the lower shell here. The nozzles feature metal filters in place to keep debris out of the drivers. The front volume of the planar, as you can see, is vented, and if I turn to the side here, you can see the planar driver peeking through the resin there, so it's a bit thin in that spot, but the rest of the resin is overall pretty good quality, and if I shine a light on it, you can see you can't really see through much of the resin except for the top part there where the top plate is connected. You can see the rather large rear volume, which will become important later. You also get 3 vents up there next to the 2-pin connector for the aforementioned rear volume. I didn't experience any driver flex or pressure buildup on these. The ventilation is very well thought out. Although the resin might be thin in some places, I feel it's overall very good quality resin. I can't make out any seam lines or anything, and the join for the metal faceplate is very smooth, and the gap is even all around. I expect these to be no more or less durable than other IEMs with a similar construction in this price range. They feel rather nice overall. As I pull up the specs for the Aether here, you'll notice that I have an asterisk on the 15mm part of the 15mm planar driver that they say powers the Aether. That's because there have been other companies in the past that have claimed 15 millimeters or sort of 14.9, 14.8 millimeter planar drivers, and then when other reviewers have opened them up and measured them with a set of calipers, they're all the same 14 millimeter planar drivers that everyone else has that are being made in the same factory. It's all the same thing, really. Until someone opens up the Aether and measures the driver, I'm going to be assuming this is the same large 14 millimeter third generation driver unit as every other set is using. The nozzles on the Aether are on the larger side, and the overall weight, while not super heavy, is on the heavier side compared to other planar IEMs in my collection. We'll see what that does in terms of comfort later on. But as far as planar IEMs go, this one is pretty easy to drive. You honestly shouldn't need a dedicated dongle for these. Speaking of planar drivers, since it's by itself here, there isn't any change in overall frequency response when you use an impedance adapter or you expose this to a higher impedance output source. So don't worry. Overall, I would say the specifications are pretty typical for a single large planar IEM. But now it's time for the cool wall, and KiwiEars seems to be doing something a little bit different with the Aether. They, tend to put resin faceplates and decorate them with various different swirls and sparkles for everything. In this case, you still get the decorated resin, but it's surrounded by this very nice sort of stair-stepped terraced aluminum look. And the look here, I think, to me, feels like sort of a black granite or like a star-shaped marble type thing, maybe like a geode. It's got some good sparkle going on. I think it adds good dimension to the design, especially with the stair-step metal around the edges. I think it looks pretty neat, honestly, and the fact that it's different from the other KiwiEars sets I have, I'm going to go ahead and stick these in cool. I like them a lot overall. I appreciate KiwiEars mixing things up in terms of design, at least compared to all the other swirly colored shells that they seem to use. Sparkly things tend to do rather well, so let's see if that trend holds up as we send these before the Council of Ladies. Starting off with Is This Pretty, we have a split verdict that skews a bit positive. Too pretty, too meh, and a single not pretty. That becomes a 3-2 score against the giving of compliments, so don't place all your hopes on these impressing the ladies. Finally, as far as their thoughts go, based on the photos alone that I sent them, it seems these ladies picked up on the fact that the Aether have larger than normal shells, which is interesting. They all seem to agree that they look a little too bulky or large to necessarily be glamorous, so that's something, but there is some love for the sparkles overall. I will say this is a mildly poor showing for the ladies in terms of their opinions, so it's okay, KiwiEars. For comfort, these shells are a little bit chunky looking, and they do feel big in my ears. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not comfortable. The inside is fairly typically shaped. There's no big protrusions or bulges or comfort wings to get in the way. For me, the nozzles, while slightly wider than average, were just fine in my ears. And while they didn't disappear into my ears like smaller shelled IEMs can do, I found that these were perfectly comfortable for sort of 4 or 5 hours at a time. I didn't have any issues with them. Surprisingly, despite how massive these looked in her little ears, my wife didn't have any problems with these, and they passed the tiny ears test, which to me was a complete surprise. The large nozzles and those enormous shells apparently weren't much of an issue for her, and while it was a very shallow fit, it was a secure fit that didn't fail while she talked, ate, or laughed. So yeah, surprisingly, these are going to get full points from both of us for comfort, but I would expect that if you have smaller ears and are maybe a little bit less tolerant for big shells than my wife is, you might not vibe well with these, so maybe try them before you buy. Let's check out how these sound, kicking things off with the low-end presentation. Planar bass is alive and well in the Aether. It's got a decent boost that doesn't become too overwhelming. The sub-bass performance is quite nice. I feel like the lower drops in Lil Jon's Get Low are appropriately rumbly without becoming too intense in the ears or fatiguing. The Aether has good energy across the entire low end. Again, it doesn't really become fatiguing or tiring. I feel like it's just right. The same goes for the sort of bass guitar and kick drum presentation. The bass drum from the beginning of When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin, it feels big and impactful. The echo from the stairwell is very present in this set. It feels produced like it was supposed to be. I will say this bass isn't full-on bass head levels, and people used to some bassier planars might find this a little bit bass shy. That said, I think it's very well executed bass. As you'd expect from a planar, it has excellent texture and speed, and I think it's very good overall. As we move into the mids, as is typical, we find that the mid-range tonality is unbothered by the low-end grunt. It's very clean, very accurate, very natural-sounding mid-range. Can You Picture That by Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem is a very groovy track, has a lot of wonderful instrumentation to it. Saxophone, bass guitar, keyboards, all of them are very well represented. There's no masking, and the various vocals from Dr. Teeth, Floyd, and Janice all sound correct. They're not affected in any way by the bass boost or anything happening up or in the treble. Very, very clean replay overall. Sounds great on this set. In terms of female vocals, the Aether does a pretty good job moving vocals forward without having to sacrifice the tonality. Nightwish's Nemo has Tarja's vocals cutting through the heavy distortion from the guitars, and her operatic delivery is rendered excellently by the Aether. It's not the absolute most vocal forward set that I've heard, but it does push female vocals a bit more forward compared to what I would describe as a truly neutral vocal presentation. Overall, as you would expect from a planar, the mids are very well done here. It's an excellent mid-range presentation. And now we come to the make or break frequency range for most planars, and I'm happy to report that the Aether does not come across as fatiguing or piercing to me or my ears. Female vocal harmonics are present and very well realized, but not so energetic as to distract from the fundamental frequencies or cause fatigue, as I said. Konomi Suzuki's vocals in Ginsen no Kaze have great moments that throw off all sorts of harmonics. She's got echo in her voice, she's got the breaths really close to the microphone, she has these sharp tonal shifts in her vocals. The Aether lets you hear them all extremely easily without shoving them super forward into your nose. It's a very similar story with percussion harmonics. Night Tempo's remix of Maria Takeuchi's Plastic Love has some pitched up cymbals in the chorus that honestly can get really intense and very fatiguing with some brighter sounding sets. And while they're very present in the ears here on the Aether, I feel like they don't absolutely dominate the replay, and they're definitely not painful on the ears, which is very important. The decay on those cymbals is nice and quick, and the sort of pitch effect that Night Tempo did there doesn't feel unnatural like it can in some brighter sets. While I wouldn't call the treble subdued, I think it's still sparkly and energetic enough without being fatiguing. It's a very good middle ground in terms of treble tuning. In terms of technical performance, as you would expect from full-size planars like this, the low-end resolving power is pretty great. The deep bass notes that are almost sort of hiding in the back of the Vince Guaraldi Trio's Skating from the Charlie Brown Christmas, those rumble pretty decently in the ears. In the mix, like I said, the bass notes are hiding behind the sort of drums and piano, but every once in a while Fred Marshall just lets a string rip and it buzzes very nicely in the right ear. At the top end, the Aether does very well in my Waltz for Debbie Listen for the Dishes test. It does about as well as what I would expect from other planars that use this driver. In terms of technical ability, it's right in line with its peers, such as the S12 and the Wu Heyday. It does very, very well. The party piece of the Aether, to my ears and brain at least, is the stereo separation and the imaging performance. Mediterranean Sundance sounded absolutely fantastic with Al and Paco each in their own ears. No claustrophobic feeling at all. The audience interactions added a little bit of forward depth, and the replay was overall fantastic. Ended up listening to the whole album. In terms of perceived 3D soundstage, again, to my ears and brain, I feel like the Aether can actually elevate well-mastered tracks. I know it's an audiophile cliche, but Steely Dan's Deacon Blues sounds appreciably wide and even a little bit tall on the Aether here. The imaging is very sharp and clear. You can point out where all the instruments and voices are coming from. The chorus in particular is very busy, and you feel sort of surrounded by the sound in a very, very nice way. The stereo separation and imaging on this set are really nice, and spoiler alert, it reminds me a lot of the Hidizs MP145. Okay, we're talking about the tuning on a planar IEM, so let's bring up the 4 branches of planar IEM tuning and see if we can assign the Aether to a department. While the bass on the Aether is boosted, as we'll see shortly, it's not quite the level of other IEMs in the department of bass and treble excitement, and it's not quite as relaxed as the IEMs in the Cozy Tone Advisory Council. It just has a little bit more treble and upper mids energy than those. Honestly, it sits right between those two groups quite nicely. There's a pair of IEMs that the Aether reminds me a lot of, but I'm not going to spoil them for now. You can see the boxes on the table. To me, the Aether comes across as neutral-ish. It's got a bit of extra bass and a bit of extra treble, but it's not quite enough to make it feel really V-shaped to me. So for now, it will be assigned to the Unpredictable Sound Doctrine Task Force. We'll go ahead and kick off the comparisons with the relatively new Artti T10 Pro, priced at $110 US. To me, the biggest difference between these two was the bass response. The T10 Pro comes across as just warmer overall. You get thumpier, rumblier bass and a bit less treble energy, but not by much, I will say. Overall, the T10 Pro comes with better accessories. You get a modular cable, you get a slightly better case. It's cheaper to boot. But again, where I feel the Aether gets a solid win is the soundstage department. I've mentioned in past reviews that I believe that the rear volume on a planar driver is responsible for things like the pinna gain and the overall sound staging effects here. And looking at the sizes of the shells on the Aether versus something like the T10 Pro here, yeah, I think the rear volume size definitely has something to do with sound staging effects, at least based on what I hear. That said, the T10 are clearly more compact and will fit more easily in more ears. But that's overall how I think the sound breaks down here. And now I'll bring out one of the veterans in the price range, the S12 Pro, priced very similarly to the Aether at $170 US. In a similar vein to the T10 Pro, the S12 Pro sounds to me like a slightly more V-shaped version of the Aether. You get more bass, and you get a bit more sparkle and a bit more airiness to the treble. Much like the T10 Pro, the S12 also comes with a modular cable and better selection of tips and smaller all-metal shells compared to the Aether here. Once again, the Aether wins the battle of sound staging, at least again to my ears and with my testing tracks. I think it's really interesting what these larger shells can do, at least to me, in terms of spatial effects compared to these smaller ones. It's very interesting to listen to these, sort of A-B. Speaking of sound staging and spatial effects, I have the current king of planar sound staging, the Hidizs MP145, priced at $160 US. MP145, I feel, to me at least, was once the king of planar IEMs. But as competition has increased at and below this price bracket, I find the MP145 harder and harder to recommend for people. It's got these massive 7mm nozzles, these absolutely enormous, chunky, very heavy shells, and the accessories package is honestly a bit disappointing. I did keep recommending it as my sort of soundstage specialist, as those enormous shells do have the benefit of a pretty huge soundstage. As you saw, I'm using the red nozzles on these as I feel those sound the best, and they're the ones that I compared with the Aether here. With those fitted, the tonality is pretty close between these two. The main difference is, again, the bass. The MP145 just has a bit more punch and a bit more rumble to the bass than the Aether, but the Aether hits the MP145 right where it hurts, though, as I honestly feel the Aether comes extremely, extremely close to matching the MP145 in terms of overall soundstage. I still think the MP145 does win, at least in most of my tracks. It did edge out a win, probably, again, down to the size. As big as the Aether are, the MP145 is just that tiny bit bigger and the vents are larger. It will win, but you do have to contend with that enormous heavy shell and those huge nozzles. Some people are going to prefer the all-metal build on this just because it's sturdier and feels better, but to put things very, very simply, the Aether is going to give you 95-98% of the soundstage performance that the MP145 has, but it will fit in more ears and it will be more comfortable. Next up, I'm going to do a 2-for-1 for y'all. I'm going to bring in those planars that I hinted at that I personally feel are the most similar to the Aether in terms of overall tuning. I have here the Tangzu x HBB Zetian Heyday, priced at $200, and the brand new-ish Tangzu Zetian Legend, priced at $260. Now, don't worry, I do have a video on the Zetian Legend coming, but for now, I'm going to compare it to the Aether and its older sister. These three honestly sound very, very similar to each other. Particularly the Heyday and the Aether are extremely, extremely close. The only thing I could hear is a bit of extra airiness in the Heyday, and then the Legend takes that little bit of extra airiness and adds even more airiness thanks to that extra 6mm planar driver that they threw in there. It isn't so much of a difference that I feel it affects the overall tonality of these three. I'll talk about it a bit more in my review of the Legend, but the extra airiness really doesn't impress me in side-by-side listening compared to the other two. The Heyday is going to be out of stock very soon. I'm pretty sure it's been discontinued. And the Legend is $100 more than the Aether. In my opinion, unless you're in love with this admittedly very cool stained glass design on the Legend, I find the Legend very, very hard to justify when the Aether exists. That extra airiness is kind of nice, but so is an extra $100 in your pocket overall. I just don't think the value proposition is there. This is discontinued. This is very, very competitive compared to these two. Finally, I personally would feel a bit remiss if I didn't mention the absolute chameleon of an IEM that the Simgot ET142 is at $220 US. With the short black nozzles with the black rings on them, the ET142 actually does a pretty decent job of imitating the tuning here on the Aether. The ET142 with those nozzles does have a good deal more sub bass, and it is more vocal forward. So it's not a perfect match, but seeing as the ET142 is $60 more than the Aether and it has a much, much nicer accessories package, I really don't think these two are competing here. Main reason I brought this out is the ET142 can, as it can with basically a lot of other planars, it can approximate the sound to the Aether to a decent degree. So if you had this, try out those short black nozzles, get an idea generally what this sounds like. So let me try to wrap this up decently quickly. T10 Pro, S12 Pro, both smaller, all metal shells, better accessories, both with more bass. S12 has a bit more treble. Both of these not really matches for the Aether in terms of overall tuning, but alternatives if you prefer the more traditional V-shaped planar or warm planar tonality. MP145, still the Soundstage king, but just barely. And with the Aether fitting in more ears, it will probably be the recommendation for me going forward. Unless you can fit these in your ears, I think this is just more comfortable overall. The Empresses. If you can still get a Heyday, especially if you can get one on clearance for a decent discount, I feel like this is a nicer built Aether with better accessories. But if this isn't available at $260, the Legend just comes across as a bad value compared to the Aether, honestly. I'll talk about it more in my big review for this. Finally, the ET142 Chameleon, as I'm going to be calling it from now on, still fantastic, can imitate the Aether. If you have it, try it out. I don't really think it competes with the Aether, which I think, honestly, has carved itself a pretty nice little niche in the market with its neutral-ish tuning and its relatively good pricing. But I think I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Okay, magicked everyone else away. I feel like I already spoiled some of this conclusion, but let's go ahead and find out where the KiwiEars Aether is going to land on the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale. I personally feel that the Aether does enough to stand out in the market, enough, I would say. More spoilers for my upcoming Zetian the Legend review, but I think that Tangzu upping the price of the Legend to $260 compared to the $200 on the Heyday has kind of left a gaping hole in the market for a neutral-ish planar at or under $200. Even though I consider the accessories here and the cable a disappointment and honestly a big downgrade from the Legend there, I still think the Aether offers a pretty good value in the market, especially if the Heyday is going to be no longer available. While the shells here aren't metal like most of the competition, the resin quality is pretty nice, and the faceplates are honestly really, really nice looking. I feel like the neutral-ish tuning is not common in planars, hence why it ended up in the different sort of catch-all category. So having an option that's more affordable than the other options is honestly pretty nice. Overall, I'm going to be putting the Aether in This Is Brilliant, as I feel that it's a great all-round tuning for multiple libraries and genres. I mean, it's neutral-ish. I think it fits right in with the other $150 to $200 planars on the market in terms of sound quality and overall, Technical performance, it's using the same driver, so you know that's to be expected. Um, I do wish it was maybe a little bit cheaper, but you know, KiwiEars is pretty good at putting their stuff on sale. Overall, I think pretty well done. Time then for the recommendation segment. Who do I think should avoid the Ether? First off, if you have the Heyday or the Legend, I think you can safely skip this one. I think it's a bit too similar to what you already have to really get much out of this. Next up, bass heads, treble heads. I think you should pass on the Ether. It's not the bassiest planar. It doesn't have the brightest presentation of other planars, and you have other options if you want those tunings in terms of planars. Finally, if you really prefer metal shells, I think the resin lower shell on the Ether will probably not be to your liking. If, however, you've grown tired of the extremely common V-shaped planar tuning and you want something a bit more on the neutral side, I think this is an absolutely excellent option. If you've tried some of the darker planars and found them to be a bit lacking in top-end energy, I think this is a safer step up than going straight to a straight-up bright planar. I also think this makes for a pretty good, you know, my first planar if your budget allows this sort of money. I'm a proponent of trying something relatively neutral-ish first, and then using that to figure out, okay, I want more bass, okay, I want more treble, sort of dialing your preferences. Overall, I think the Ether is a great planar IEM, and it deserves consideration if you're in the market for a planar. But that's going to close the book on the review for the KiwiEars Aether. The planar market is heating up, and I think there have been a lot of really good sets to be released lately. There's also been a lot of disappointments. I think I'm going to try to do a catch-up video where I feature a whole bunch of planars that maybe I didn't think were too stellar or just didn't work for me for one reason or another. So keep an eye out for that. But that's going to do it for the moment. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate all your continued support. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.